All right, I'm going to start off this video, by showing you a clip real quick. So just watch it, enjoy, and then we'll get going on the PowerPoint.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris.
All right, so, whoops, where are we here? All right, so if you did see the gorilla, good job. If you didn't see the gorilla and you thought, what gorilla? That's because you were focused on counting the passes. It told you to count how many passes the white team made. That was what your brain was paying attention to. So your brain, your eyes saw the gorilla come in, and your brain said, I need to focus on counting passes, not worth paying attention to the gorilla, ignored the gorilla completely, and you might not have even realized you saw it. So it's a good introduction to the functions of the nervous system. There are three. The first function is to gather information from your senses. So anything your body senses, something you feel, something you see, something you hear, something you smell, something you taste, those are all senses. And our nervous system gathers these senses from the outside world or also internally and carries them to your brain. The second function of the nervous system, we monitor changes occurring inside and outside of the body. And these neurons that carry this sensory input to our brain are called sensory neurons. The second function of the nervous system is integration. So if you didn't see the gorilla, your brain decided that it was not information that was important to integrate and respond to, so your brain just ignored it. If you did see the gorilla, for some reason, your brain said, maybe this is important, maybe we should focus on this, and you noticed it. So integration is just processing information, the process to interpret sensory input and decide if an action is needed. And the neurons that integrate the information are called interneurons. And then the third function of the nervous system is motor output. Motor output is just your body's response to the sensory input. So counting, when you were counting the passes, your brain was telling your mind to keep track of those counts. If I said to you right now, stand up and clap your hands, and you all stood up and clapped your hands, that's a motor output. So those are motor neurons that are sending information from your brain to your muscles or to your glands to respond to some sort of sensory input. And the motor output always activates muscles or glands. Those are called effectors. All right. Now, okay. So here you can see this example shows you your eyes. You are watching the video, and all the information from that video was coming in through that sensory input, okay? Your brain didn't pay attention to all of it. There was also a change in the background, like the color of the sign changed, I think, or the number on the wall changed. You may not have noticed that. Everything comes in, only some of the information is integrated. So sensory input is the first function, integration or processing is the second function, and then motor output is the third function. So deciding if it's worth a response and responding to it. All right. Neurons are also classified in a couple different ways, and they relate to the functions. So there's a sensory neuron, and you can imagine the sensory neuron carries nerve impulses toward the brain and spinal cord. So if I touch something hot, here's my coffee, I touch something hot, that heat sensation from my fingertip travels down my hand, down my arm, to my brain. That's a sensory neuron, or those are sensory neurons that carry that information from my fingertip toward my brain. Motor neurons, then my brain says, that was really hot, might cause damage, you should pull your hand away. So motor neuron sends information away from the brain, back down my arm to my muscle, and pulls my arm away. Okay, so that would be a motor neuron that carries the information away from the brain and spinal cord toward the muscles. And then I don't know what that last blank is for. Just cross out that last blank. I'm not sure why that's there. All right, so again, sensory neurons. Another term for sensory neurons are afferent neurons. They carry impulses from the sensory receptors in the skin, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, to the central nervous system, which is the brain or spinal cord. Motor or efferent neurons carry impulses from the central nervous system, from the brain or spinal cord, to the muscles or glands and stimulate a response. And finally, interneurons. I think this is where that line was supposed to go. Interneurons are called association neurons. They're small neurons found within the brain or spinal cord, and they connect sensory and motor neurons. So if you look at your worksheet you're filling out, that second bullet point under motor neuron should actually be under interneuron. So under interneuron, it should say that they connect sensory and motor neurons. And you can see it here. So here you know that this is the sensory neuron because the signal is going to come from the dendrite to the axon. Okay, so this would be some sensation out here. Let's say this is your finger. Your finger receives a signal. That signal gets carried from the dendrites to the axon into this structure represents the spinal cord. This right here, this little green neuron, is an interneuron. So it's connecting the sensory information and the motor neuron. So it's integrating the information and deciding what to do with it, and sends that signal from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. This motor neuron originates in the spinal cord and then carries the information from the dendrites here down the axon to the axon terminal, which connects to the muscles or glands and initiates some sort of response. All right. Next, nervous system function. This is tricky. This is a tricky part of the PowerPoint. We're going to talk about how a signal gets sent through a neuron. It's a long process. You don't need to memorize it, but I want you to understand sort of how it works. Okay, so if you can picture a neuron that looks like this. Oh, where are we here? Okay, this neuron right here, this one. All right, signal's going to come in from the dendrite, pass through the cell body, down the axon to the axon terminal, remember? But what does that mean when I say that signal's going to be sent? Sending a message through the neuron, first thing that happens is at the dendrite, there's some sort of stimulus that triggers the dendrite. So maybe if there's a pin, imagine there's a pin sticking up. Let's say this is a pin, and I touch the tip of the pin. That's a stimulus that stimulates the dendrite of the neuron in my fingertip. That neuron becomes depolarized, which means the electrical charge on that neuron changes. And that those electrical signals in the neuron are actually what send the message. So as it becomes depolarized, it's going to send that depolarization signal the whole way down the dendrite, through the cell body, down the axon to the axon terminal. And as that neuron is depolarizing, behind it, a signal is coming down that's repolarizing it. Okay, so it's getting it set up to send another signal following the first signal. Once it gets to the end of the neuron, there are these chemicals that I talked about called neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters are located at the end of the axon of one neuron, in those little axon terminals at the end, and they are released when the action potential or this signal gets to the end of the neuron, and they leave that neuron and attach to the neuron that's right next to it and stimulate the dendrites of the next neuron to continue the message. And then the message continues from one neuron to the next until it reaches its target. So let's see. Let me get through some of this. Let me go. Okay. All right. I don't know that we're going to go into all this, if I'm being honest. Let's skip over most of this. Okay. When I say polarized, just imagine that there's a differing charge. It's a really complicated process, and if we were in class and could have a discussion on it, I would go into it in more detail. But we don't really have the time to get through it like this. So I'm just going to explain it, but you're not going to need to explain it on your test. But you can see a differing in charge. So we have this polarized membrane, meaning there's a positive charge on the outside of the neuron and a negative charge on the inside of the neuron. When we get stimulated, it depolarizes, meaning that positive charge starts to move into the neuron. The positive charge kind of propagates through the neuron, and those positive charges continue to flow into the neuron. And then behind that, these other ions or charges flow out of the neuron, repolarizing it. And this process right here is called an action potential. So an action potential is basically sending charges from one side of an ion to the other in order to carry a message. And this is how all of the messages in our body travel. So anytime you see something, hear something, smell something, feel something, all it is this difference in charge traveling through our neurons, and then chemicals at the end of the neuron being released to trigger other neurons. All right, so the last part of this, I'm going to pause the video here. I think, yeah, I'm going to pause here and do one more video to finish up this PowerPoint.